Right now, the internet is collectively losing its mind over a brand new law that quietly went into effect in Germany. Millions of young men are suddenly realizing that if they want to go on a gap year or work overseas or even just take a long backpacking trip, they legally have to request a permission slip from the government first, from the military first. And yes, this mandate applies exclusively to men. Shocker, I know. And if you think this is just a European problem, think again. Here in the US, young men are already mandated to register for the selective service, the draft. And recently, there's been an aggressive push to make the registration process completely automatic, meaning no registration forms, no paperwork, no consent, no opting out. The moment you turn 18, the government puts your name on the list. I'll be honest with you guys, seeing these headlines drop side by side really stuck in my craw. And judging by the comment section, it seems I'm not the only one. We live in an era where we constantly and rightfully demand equal opportunity. We demand equal pay for equal work, equal access to boardrooms and positions of power, and shared responsibilities in the household. Bodily autonomy is considered as a sacred human right for half of the population. But for the other half, when it comes to the ultimate sacrifice, giving up our bodily autonomy, giving up our freedoms, and in many cases, giving up our lives for the state, all of a sudden society becomes incredibly traditional. Today, we need to talk about the empathy gap, society's reflex to view female suffering as a systemic crisis and male suffering as just another individual failure, and how true gender inequality is impossible if we only liberate one half of the population while neglecting the other. Now, when I say this feels brazenly unfair, I know exactly what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute. Men hold the vast majority of CEO positions. They dominate in political office. They make more pay, for crying out loud. What do you mean males or men are disadvantaged? And let's grant that. At the very top of society, male dominance is incredibly visible. But calling it privilege is the wrong framing. Those men at the absolute apex of society usually get there by making extreme sacrifices that most men and women are entirely unwilling to make. They sacrifice their health, they sacrifice their free time, and most uniquely aversive to women, they sacrifice their families in order to achieve utility. Furthermore, sociologists call this the apex fallacy. Society has this bad habit of judging the entire male experience by the top 1% of men. To understand the average guy, we need to look at history. For most of human history, gender roles was essentially a survival contract based on mutual sacrifice. Women were expected to sacrifice their autonomy in order to nurture the next generation. Men were expected to sacrifice their safety in order to provide, to build the infrastructures, and to protect the borders. We often look at the higher aggregate male earnings and assume that that is just pure privilege. But as researchers like Dr. Warren Farrell points out in his book, The Boy Crisis, this is actually a pay paradox. Society places a rigid expectation on men to trade their safety, their health, and their bodily autonomy for utility and for the survival and benefit of others, especially women and children. That's why we never hear about the glass cellar for men, even while we see every opportunity taken to discuss the glass ceiling for women. Yes, men do make up the majority of billionaires, but men also do virtually all of society's most dangerous, dirty, and undesirable jobs, which is why they account for over 90% of workplace fatalities and injuries, a staggering 75% of deaths of despair, which are basically suicide and overdoses, and over 90% of the prison population. And here's where that empathy gap becomes most concerning. As Farrell points out, there is a 14-to-1 ratio in the incarceration rate between men and women in America. To put that in perspective, the incarceration rate between blacks and whites is 5-to-1. And that is enough for us to regularly march in the streets, organize protests and riots, and call it a systemic crisis. But when we're faced with a 14-to-1 ratio, a threefold increase over the racial disparity, society and the fact that men are routinely sentenced to longer prison sentences than women for the exact same crimes, society just shrugs and assumes that everything is working perfectly and that men are just making really bad decisions. Over the last 70 years, we've seen a massive movement to free women from their half of that survival contract. We've dismantled the glass ceiling by telling women that you're a human being with boundless potential and that whatever a man can do, you can do better. But we've completely forgotten about the glass cellar. We are living through what Richard Reeves, the author, has called a stalled revolution. We've updated the software for women while keeping men on the same old societal hardware. We treat men not as human beings, but as human doings, valuable only for what they can provide, protect, and build. When Germany mandates that only men register in order to leave the country, or the US mandates that only men sign up for the draft, with the current push to do so automatically, the government is saying the quiet part out loud. When it benefits the economy, we support gender equality. But when push comes to shove, you are the disposable sex. So if the data is so clear on this, why isn't society more outraged by this glaring double standard? Because while we've successfully updated the laws for women, society still hasn't updated its reflexes. We're dealing with what is an emotional hangover of the old survival contract. We still have what sociologists call the chivalric reflex. Both men and women are culturally wired to protect women, but men are expected to protect themselves. Under the old rules, a man's weakness was what the author Warren Farrell calls his facade of strength. Because he was the historical protector, he couldn't show vulnerability, and we still enforce this today. When a woman is systemically disadvantaged, society rallies. We create all kinds of safety nets, mentorship programs, and policy changes. But when a man is disadvantaged, whether he's fallen behind in education, skyrocketing suicide rates, or being forced to register for the military, society's default response is a shrug. When a woman falls behind, we ask, how did society fail her? How did the system let her down? When a man falls behind, we ask, what bad choices did he make? A man's suffering is viewed as an individual failure, while a woman's suffering is viewed as a systemic emergency. I want to be very clear here and touch the guardrails so we don't fall over. Pointing this out is not about dragging women down or rolling back the clock. The women's liberation movement of the 20th century was one of our greatest achievements. It was necessary not because men are some sexist control freaks who just want to oppress women. It happened because technology had, for the first time, liberated us in so many ways, from the advent of the birth control pill to the advent of machinery that made manual labor largely obsolete. But we can't let our empathy and our progress to stop there. We can't have an a la carte approach to gender equality. We can't say that it is a social construct in the boardroom or in sports or in anywhere that's convenient, but it is a biological destiny in the battlefield, in dangerous or dirty jobs, or anywhere that's inconvenient. If we want a truly healthy egalitarian society, we must liberate both sexes from their rigid and exhausting roles of sheer survival. If we're going to draft citizens or mandate that they register in order to leave the country for national security reasons, it must apply to all citizens, period. Anything else is state-sponsored gender discrimination. We need a unified gender movement, one that looks at the struggles of men not with suspicion and mockery, but with the same empathy that we afford women. We need to unlock men from the obligation of being mere human doings and grant them the same grace of simply being human beings. But I want to hear from you. Does this double standard stick in your craw too? Undoubtedly, there's a lot of women who still feel like there's yet many other double standards out there that cut against them, many of which I would probably agree with. But these issues are not either or. They can all be discussed without undermining the other. Moreover, this one is particularly salient because it is codified in law, a law that we take for granted. It's almost the default to assume that men should take care of the traditional roles. Like men should do all the things that men have always done for time immemorial, the protector, provider, the builder. These are all things that men are still expected to do, both legally and socially. It's taken for granted. But to either question that or to question why women are still not occupying their traditional roles is often viewed as sexist. Why is that? How do we have such conversations without it devolving into a toxic gender war debate? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Please leave your comments below, and if this video made you think, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.